22nd, it's 2022. We're here in Studio One with one of my favorite people. Now, kids, he's won 10 Grammys. He's worked with Young the Giant, White Stripes, Jason Mraz, My Morning Jacket, U2, Elton John, Etta James. 4 records with Etta James?
About that, yeah.
And he's just fucking cool. You're New York cool, though.
Yeah.
New York cool and LA cool are
very different.
Aren't
very
they?
Different. Very different.
How is that? Why is New York cool?
Because I think New Yorkers are kind of no bullshit people, you know? They just kind of tell you where it's at and you just deal with it. And, you know, the cliche of LA people was always that they, you know, kind of smile and kind and love you, babe, let's do lunch kind of thing. But I don't think that's really true anymore. I think maybe because there's so many New Yorkers that have moved here over the last 20, 30 years that it's more New York than it is LA now.
Well, you're an OG East Coast guy too because you're from Boston.
Mm-hmm.
But you've been out here pretty much all of your career.
Yeah, pretty much 30 years now.
Is it because the record labels are out here, the industry, or just the nice weather?
I moved out here initially because I just wanted to dive into a whole new world. At the time, I thought like some of the best music was being made here and people were doing more innovative things. So I just kind of, as a kid, you know, out of college, just dove in, moved here when I was 20, got a gig at Cherokee Studios as an assistant engineer and just, you know, worked my way up.
Wow. Cherokee, very famous studio as well. I'm friends with the Mellencamp family. He did his first big records there. Do you remember him being in there?
I do remember him being there with Don Gaiman and George Tutko was the engineer. And Jack and Diane was done there, mixed there. I think they cut it maybe at John's home.
Belmont.
Is that where it was? Yeah.
Well, he had a different studio before Belmont Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.
That's right.
But yeah, as young Kenny Aronoff too on his first session, who's probably the biggest session drummer maybe ever.
Kenny was the drummer in the band. Amazing.
Have you done? He's been on the show. Have you done stuff with him before?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've done stuff with everybody.
A few people.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, if you look at your...
I mean, I was lucky that, you know, I worked as an engineer, I worked with a lot of different producers. And so, you know, every producer sort of had their team of maybe studio musicians that they hired all the time. So whether it was Jeff Porcaro or Mike Baird or... you know, whomever, Keltner, you know, all those guys. So it's great. You know, I really saw the top of the top of LA musicians. And that was definitely like a real awakening. When I came out here, the first few sessions I worked on, it was Jeff Porcaro, Larry Carlton, Chuck Rainey, all those like just premier session musicians were on the dates. And I just remember thinking like all the musicians that I knew from New York and Boston, there were some great players then, really great, you know, and Boston, you know, has Berklee School of Music and New England Conservatory and, you know, puts out amazing players. But the level of musicianship here within the studio community was at a whole other level. I mean, I kind of felt like I went from playing, you know, minor league baseball to major league baseball. It was a whole other thing.
Is that kind of stem, do you think, from the Wrecking Crew in the 60s and using the same bands on every single thing? And then it's kind of...
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, those guys were the go-to guys. And, you know, and I think when, you know, as a producer, when you have success working with certain musicians, of course, you know, you kind of, you know, you feel like it's your lucky charm or something and you want to, you know, go back and rehire those guys. And, you know, for a producer, you need somebody that is a chameleon, that as a musician, you know, one day the session might be really pop, the next day it could be heavier rock thing, and then it might be a jazz thing. So you need a musician that can understand all those different styles and just easily morph into it. And also you need a personality that can bond with the artist. And the great thing about all the studio musicians here is they're all so egoless, humble, just nice guys. And I've seen it countless times where the artist walks in the room and 5 minutes later they feel like they've known these strangers all their life and they feel excited to get in the room and record with them. That's a real important skill for a session musician to have, is that ability to just bond with a person and feel like they're part of their team, you know?
Yes. Sean Hurley is the perfect example of that.
Sean Hurley is the ultimate example of that.
Yes.
Like the meekest, mildest, kindest guy, but can play any kind of bass style and play it great with always great tone and taste in parts. And you know, like for me as producing a record, I've learned over the years that the less specific direction I give to a player, the better the results will be. In other words, if I said, hey, can you play this bass line, and sung that bass line to them, they could do that and they'd give me back just that and that, nothing more.
Yeah.
And there's maybe sometimes that's good, but you want people to inject themselves in it. You want them to bring something special. You want them to take your idea and craft it in their light, you know, in the way that they would hear it, the way that they would interpret it. So the great thing about working with Sean or Victor Andrizzo or Matt Chamberlain or Dave Levita, all these guys who are just fantastic, Zach Ray, Roger Manning, fantastic players, is that you can give them an idea and they run with it. They make it theirs. They go, okay, I know what you're trying to get to. Let me take it and then craft it in a way that it's kind of the voicings that I would use. Or maybe that melody you have has got some merits, but maybe it's a little cliche or maybe it's a little stiff. So let me just tweak it a little bit, do something that feels more honest to me, and you end up with a much more unique record that way. And it ends up also, for me, that I never repeat myself, because that's really, really important. You know, if I kind of had the same thoughts for a melody or a song structure or arrangement, when you throw it out to a bunch of different people and allow them to take part in it, you end up with something so much better.
This amount of responsibility that a record producer has is terrifying. To me, because it's one, you're dealing with finances. A lot of artists are coming in and they saved $20,000, they saved $100,000, whatever it may be, and you're responsible for the budget. You're responsible for their future in a sense. And this artist might have a hit song that you think, but you produce it the wrong way or you produce it the correct way. And there's all these things that I imagine with your experience at this point, you can kind of push them aside, but you're dealing with their lives and their careers and their sound, which they're so particular about, a lot of them. And that was terrifying, I think. I mean, some people can't handle being a record producer. They just want to engineer so they can. It's
interesting. I never really, I do feel the weight of it. I will say that. I do feel like every day that I come in, I've got a responsibility to that artist to make it as great as I can possibly make it, especially when it comes to new artists, because, you know, kind of like you say, they don't really have their sound defined yet, so they're kind of looking to you to help them, and that can be tough sometimes. And I really make it a point to try to work with people now that do have a good sense of who they are as artists, because otherwise I can point them in a direction, but if it's not really true to them, if it's not comfortable to them, ultimately they're not going to feel great being there. They're going to kind of rebel against it, or they're going to waffle and bounce all over the place and try 5 different things before they find that thing, that comfortable sound for them. So it's really, really important for me now to kind of, when I meet with an artist and talk to them about working together, to get a sense of like, how clear they are on that vision of what they want for the record. No matter how big the artist is or how new the artist is, I always really, make it a point to discuss, like, well, what do you want out of this record, and what do you want it to sound like, and what, or even if they don't know that, I'll make it a point to say, well, what don't you want it to sound like? What are your fears? What if you're afraid of sounding too heavy or too syrupy or whatever it might be? I really try to get a lot of that art of them and have them really verbalize and own what they want to sound like. I think it makes my job way easier when they know what they want.
And sometimes they don't have any clue, and that's why they are coming to you, and they'll shoot down every other idea. But then there's other artists like Clem, who knows Cherry Glazer, who also has been on this show, and I adore. You did her biggest record, and what you did with her demos to the finished product is amazing. What was that like working with her, real quick?
She's a blast. She's the sweetest person in the world. A badass guitar player. She's so good. I mean, when you look at her, and even when you look at her with a guitar in her hand, you just something about her whole presence. You don't really feel like she's going to kill when she picks up a guitar, but she does. She's incredible. It was really fun working with her and Sasami and Tabor and everybody in the band. They were really great. We spent probably about a week or so at downtown rehearsal, really going through song arrangements and really defining all the parts before we even came in here. And that was a fun record too, because I made it with Carlos De La Garza. We did it together, and Carlos is great. He and I have done a number of, we've done a number of things together, and he's a great engineer, great musician, and it was really fun for me to collaborate with somebody like that. He had done the previous 2 Cherry Glazer records.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he brought me in because he felt like they wanted to step it up a little bit, and he felt like he was almost in a rut with them, if you will, that he just needed some like fresh opinions and fresh ideas on where it could go. So that's kind of where I came in terms of like really working out bass and drum grooves with them. And, Clem really has a sound. And like I say, she's a great player. So it was, I think we experimented a bit, using 2 guitar amps in here back in the ISO booth there. And, definitely a lot of doubling of parts and things that she hadn't done in the past. But she's a great artist. She's wonderful.
And the personality is just the funnest thing to be around. You had her when she was like 18, weren't you? Or 20 maybe?
I think she was about 20, yeah.
Yeah, she's incredible. And you did that in this room.
We did it here, Studio One, Sunset Sound, which was my home, as you know, for 10, 12 years now, something like that.
Wow, it's been that long. If you want to listen to Cherry Glazer and a song Joe did with her, Told You I'd Be With the Guys, throw that track on. It's a banger. I love that. That whole record's good. What is that called? Apocalypto?
Apocalyptic. It's hard to say.
She's amazing. Sunset Sound, Studio One, obviously built in 1958 for Disney. 62 it goes online. Public, hook up with A&M, Elektra Records. And for those that don't know, I'm sitting 2 feet away from where Mercedes-Benz Janis Joplin was done. Eruption Van Halen was tracked right here. The Doors' first 6 records were all worked on in here. I mean, Rolling Stones, Van Halen 1, Doobie Brothers. I mean, name me 3 of your favorite records you've made. Not favorite, but 3 records you've done in here that mean a lot to you.
It's funny. When you asked me to do this, I was thinking about the very first time I was in Sunset Sound, which was early 80s with Frank Zappa. We were working on a number of records at the same time. And, he was working, one day we'd work at the record plant, the next day we'd be at the Village, we'd be at Cherokee, we'd be wherever. And we came in here and did a lot of different overdubs for a few different albums. And he loved this place because he felt like it was a place that you really got down to work at. That, you know, at the time, the Record Plant and a lot of those other studios really had a reputation of being like kind of the party place. You know, there were a lot of distractions, and he just felt like he came in here, got down to work, and then went home, and he loved that. He felt he was like so productive when he got here.
Yeah. He didn't drink or drug or do anything. That's what people don't. A lot of people don't
Frank
know.
was totally straight. In fact, if you were in the band and ever got caught with pot or whatever, you would be out of the band. Yeah. No,
and did Hot Rats in 1969 in Studio 2.
Wow.
You knew that, right?
No, I knew he was here prior to when I worked with him in the 80s, but I didn't know Hot Rats was done in 2.
Here in TTG.
Wow.
But please continue on.
Yeah. And then, so then I was thinking after that, then I think the next project I did here was this band from Canada called Red Rider. And they had a huge hit that we cut right here called Lunatic Fringe. It's still kind of all over the airwaves. Yeah. But I remember what the drums were here in the live room, sort of in the back of the room, which is, it's funny, it's a spot that I never use anymore, but for whatever reasons, we had the drums in the back of the room, and I think maybe guitar amps in the piano booth or in the vocal booth here. And
that over there, though?
Yeah, right by the mic.
I've never seen anyone play them there in 4 years.
I don't know why. I think at the time, I was probably always thinking, get the drums where you have the longest throw, so the longest distance for the room mics.
Yeah.
So I remember putting them in the back of the room. And it's not like it's a big bombastic drum sound or anything, but I do remember, you know, so my experience with consoles and sound, you know, for the most part before I came here was really working at Cherokee, which had a Trident A-range console, which is pretty fat console. And doing the Red Rider stuff, we tracked it all here. Then we went to a little studio in the Valley that had a Trident TSM console. But I remember leaving here with the tracks and hearing them over there, thinking like, wow, this stuff sounds really thick and powerful. And that was the custom built
the Bushnell
console. The Bushnell, that's right. That's what I was trying to think of the name. It was the old custom built Bushnell console
API.
with the API EQs in it. The monitor mixer was over on the side, similar to Studio 3's console. Yeah. But man, it sounded punchy and and it still holds up when I hear it on the radio today. You know,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
yeah. T-Bone Burnett bought that console.
That's right,
and obviously did a ton of amazing, tremendous work on it after I left here. But that's I didn't realize that was one of the first things you did here.
Yeah,
that was
one of the first records I ever did. Actually, it was probably the second or third album I ever engineered.
I've known you for a few years, and everybody knows you did Joe's Garage, Frank Zappa, when you were 20 years old as an assistant. That was at Capitol. There's 300 interviews if you want to hear Joe talk about Frank Zappa, Joe's Garage. But, you know, you having your official room here at Sunset, and then you do all your tracking here in Studio One and bounce all over the world. You're going to France in a couple weeks. I just saw you in Nashville last weekend. When you're starting off, what was one of the first big records that you heard your sounds on the radio, or something that really just fueled you to kind of be like, this is awesome. I want to produce records for the rest of my life?
Well, I think the fuel is getting it right. You know, I still don't feel like I've gotten it right. You know, hundreds of records later, I still feel like, I could have done that better. I could have got a better performance out of them. I could have got a better guitar sound, or the mix could have been better, or whatever. I don't really ever feel like I've made that perfect record. You know, I don't know, Talking Heads or whatever, those albums that are timeless, that I love and live by. I don't really feel like I've ever made one of those. Maybe, you know, there's a song on a record that I think that all fell into place, and that just, you know, turned out great. But an album top to bottom, 10 cuts with a singular vision and great performances and great mixes. I don't think I've got there yet.
Is that you though? Just your inner maybe insecurity, or just being so meticulous and an expert
I'm
where
sure
you
it's all
never
those,
will feel
it's
that?
all those things, you
Yeah.
know, and that combined with perhaps whatever the artist doesn't like about the record. Artists are just like producers and engineers and musicians. They're all perfectionists, and they're looking for a certain thing in the album they do, and you try your best to get inside their head and decipher it and bring it out of them, but you don't always quite get there. And plus there's the factor that it certainly takes me 2 to 3 years to get away from a project, to have any sense of objectivity from it. So when I hear something like when I heard those early records I made on the radio, if I were in the car, I would click it off instantly. I couldn't stand to hear it. And I was always left with the feeling, you hear 2 seconds of it on the radio and you think, oh, no, it's not as loud as the song that was there before, or it doesn't have as much bottom end as the song that was just previously playing. Oh, no. And so that's the fuel. That's what keeps you going. You think, oh, God, the vocal was too loud, or all those things. I got to get it better.
Wow, I love that. I was just going through hard drives and I was looking at some old folders of work, and I'm like, oh, God, I should just throw that away. That was a disaster day. And have you had artists where you've thought you've done an amazing job and they just rip your work and art to shreds and it just destroys you? Because you're an artist, you're a producer, you're also a musician. You started off as a musician, you're an engineer, one of the best ever. But when somebody really gives you shit about the production, a mix, it hurts.
Oh, of course you take it personally.
Yeah.
But, you have to step back and start to think like, okay, well, what is it that I didn't understand? What is it that I didn't get? And sometimes it's really just the artist's insecurity, or the artist not really signing on to that vision. Like I said earlier, if they're not decisive in what they want, it's hard for anybody around them to be decisive. They've got to really be clear on where they're going with the record and be able to verbalize that. And if they're not, they've at least then got to say, you know what, I'm not exactly clear where this record should be. I trust you. Take it where you want to take it. And if it's really not working for me, if it's uncomfortable for me, I'll tell you, and then we'll take a step back. But when people aren't confident within themselves, that's when it's really difficult to work with them. And I think that's the key to great records, is people trusting each other in the relationship, being confident that they made the right choice in hiring you and letting you do your thing, and also being able to speak up if they don't like it. Because I love being told, like, yeah, that's not it. I really would love it to be more like this, because then you're like, okay, great, I know where to go now. Oh, cool, okay, I've really felt good about going here, but now I see exactly, more specifically, what red is to you, because red is this to me, but your red is a little different. And so yeah, I think having that communication, that understanding and trust is really, really important. I mean, the records that I've made that I've felt like I've sort of bonded with the artist and we're on the same page, I think those are the most successful ones that I've made. Sure. I don't mean financially, but artistically successful.
Do you ever produce according to the times or the industry, where it's like an artist comes in, they have a great set of demos, and you're like, I need to make this sound like what's relevant right now? I mean, I need to give this country song a hip hop bottom end kind of thing. And is that, or do you just do what's best for their sound, regardless of what's going on in 2023 or 1983?
No, I think you do what's best for them, but I think you can't help but be influenced by the times that you live in. I mean, I listen to music all the time. My drive home is an hour. I listen to, Sirius or whatever I'm listening to on the way to and from work. And I'm listening to demos in the early morning before I start my sessions. So I'm constantly affected by what's going on musically in the time that we're living in. So I think you can't help that, Yeah. And yes, there are trends, whether it is, because we've had 30 years of hip hop, there's records are bigger on the bottom now. They're punchier. They're more aggressive in terms of the low end than they ever were. So I think that kind of carries over into every genre of music. I think you want to do something that's sort of competitive in that sense. And, now you look at pop records and even song structure has changed. There's no intros on records, not hardly ever a bridge.
Get to that chorus.
It's like endless choruses. And, it's funny because sometimes like a manager or A&R person will come in and go, maybe you don't need that intro, or maybe you don't need that re-intro, or what is this? This 410? Oh, you got to get it down to 330. Lose all those instrumental bits. And, for me, the instrumental sections are kind of, especially for a band, that's where you identify who you are. That's where you put in the quirky sound or the melodic lick or the unique groove that really makes you stand out from another artist. So, when somebody comes in and, wants you to chop off something that's really like the signature, it's kind of like, telling Eve Klein, like, I don't know, maybe you want to use a little different shade blue. You just, what? Are you crazy?
There's a lot of great A&R guys, and I'm sure you've worked with a ton of them, but there's also a lot that are 24 out of college, don't even know how to play an instrument, and they come in and tell you, maybe you should turn the hi-hat down a little bit. How do you handle that?
I mean, I've had great A&R people to deal with. The good thing for me is when I have a great A&R guy that I can bounce things off, he hears things that I don't hear. Part of the job of a producer is being objective, really giving yourself distance from the project and seeing the overall, while at the same time you're diving into the details and making sure everything is perfect, but you really got to have a sense of, is the big picture working or not? And the fact that you're so vested and so deeply entwined in the project, you can only have so much distance. That's a nice thing with projects now. They take forever to complete. So sometimes you're working on something, then you take 2 weeks off from it to go work on another project. When you come back to the other project, you've gained a little bit more objectivity, which is a great thing. Yeah. But what a good A&R person can offer you is that feedback that you can't give because you're working on the project day in and day out, and he's heard it once or twice over the last 2 months, and he'll hear things differently than what you hear. So having somebody in the creative team, that's a big plus, really big plus. I mean, the danger with somebody that is not as experienced as an A&R person is that they may, in a sense, have other motives, meaning they want to hit so they can advance in their job. So they're desperately trying to take that artist and sort of contemporize them, if you will, make them sound like other artists at the moment that's out in the world. And that's always a little dangerous. But the good thing is somebody that's younger is hearing through a much different lens than me and will have different criteria and different things they expect out of a vocal or out of a drum beat. So it's kind of like, if you got the right person involved, it's pretty great having more feedback.
Dave Rath, friend of both of ours. He was at Roadrunner when you did Young the Giant, correct? So you were working with him as A&R for Young the Giant's first record, which is their biggest ever. Had all the big hits on it. My Body, Cough Syrup, Apartment. That was that your A&R guy?
Yes.
Did he bring them to you? Or you discovered them?
No, I didn't really discover them. They came to me. They were called Two Jakes.
Yep.
And they'd heard a couple of records I did and liked them and called me just out of the blue. I don't know how they got my number, but just called me and said that, they wanted to work with me. And I was flattered. And I said, send me some demos. And they sent me a few songs. And My Body wasn't in there. Cough Syrup was. And I remember really liking it, as well as some of the other songs that they sent. And at the time, they weren't signed. And I just said, guys, I don't know if I can get involved with something that's unsigned. If you end up getting a record deal and having a budget, then, let's talk again. And then 6 months later, they called me. Maybe feels like it wasn't even 6 months. Maybe it was 4 months later. They called me and said, "Yeah, we got this deal on Roadrunner, and we want to make a record." So I was like, "Great, okay." Awesome. So the fun part about that record was that. Again, just like talking about the Cherry Glazer record, we spent a lot of time in pre-production, much more than the Cherry Glazer. The guys had an apartment down the street here, right by Guitar Center on Sunset, and we camped out there. I don't know how they were maybe living there 6 months before we actually got into the studio. And sometimes I'd go up there, spend a day, 3 days, sometimes, a couple of hours, check in, hear the new material, offer some feedback. But a lot of time was spent outside the studio getting all those arrangements right. And the other thing was that Francois was really not a drummer. He was a percussion student. He was like studying classical orchestral percussion. Yeah. So, he understood beats and grooves and sounds and all, but he wasn't really like a day-to-day rock drummer laying down rock beats. So it was kind of new to him to really have to be heavy-handed and dig in and kind of play straight beats. So there was a learning curve for him. The great thing is coming from a sense of orchestral percussion, he heard things very differently. And his sense of beats were very different than your typical rock drummer would be. So I remember it was always like trying to find a place where the part felt comfortable to Francois. It was something that he could own and something he could physically play. But at the same time, it had to be something that was driving and powerful enough that it really gave the song the groove and momentum that it needed. And then there was a lot of finessing of guitar parts. Sometimes the guys really didn't have a sense of who was playing what. And, when you're in a band and you're used to rehearsing in a little rehearsal room, everything's loud. You really can't hear all the parts. You don't know really what's going on. You're just doing your thing. And then when you actually sit there and dissect the part, you go, well, do you realize you're kind of doubling up the rhythm here, and it's actually making the track sound smaller, or maybe you could play it in a different register, different octave, or maybe you lay out here and let him take it here, and that actually makes the record sound bigger for that moment. So all those little things were worked out before they came in here. So when they came in here, it was kind of a process of really getting great sounds and great performances. Certainly some parts were tweaked, here in the studio, but a lot of it was worked out outside the room. I'm actually just remembering now that I had Samir standing right here next to the drum kit. Do you have a picture of that? Yeah. Those sessions, really?
I'll put it up, yeah.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, and we used the vocals he did in the room with the band, I think we redid all those. Maybe one or two songs Islands, maybe that was a live in the studio vocal. I think we end up using like a Sony C37A mic on his voice, maybe sometimes an SM7. But yeah, I remember him.
So he
being right
tracked
there.
right out here on the vocals on the floor? Mm-hmm. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, but they were guides. They were guide vocals, but maybe some of the more chill songs where the bleed of the drums wouldn't be that severe. We actually used bits, and I'm never afraid of that. I'll comp between a live vocal and a overdub vocal and get the sound as close as possible. And, it's about the performance. It's what sounds the most exciting.
Yeah. What's that do for you, though? So Young the Giant, they're college kids. They're coming down here to kind of make a record. No record label at the time, but then they become massive. They're on every festival. They're blazing through the college market. For you as a producer, to know them when they really don't know what they're doing, kind of, and just have a desire and some talent, but then to see them touring the globe, playing for 100,000 people, it's
fantastic.
It's got to be so fulfilling for you to even be a part of that.
Yeah, I remember when the record took off. My manager at the time would keep me updated, and he, call me one day and go, "Hey, did you know that My Body is number 20, or, did you know you guys sold 75,000 records already, or all those kind of things." But I didn't, not sound jaded, but I was like, "Oh yeah, that's nice. Oh, great. I don't get that caught up in it,
Yeah.
But it was really, really great to see them after the fact doing shows. In fact, I remember being up in Portland, Oregon for a project, and they were playing the Wonder Ballroom, I think, not the Wonder Ballroom, the Crystal Ballroom there, and sing a show, and it was all ages. And just to see all these little girls going nuts over Samir and knowing all the words to the songs, and the record had only been out, I don't know, a few months.
Wow.
And they were, these crazed fans. That was pretty impressive.
That album is such a pinnacle of the times, too, because it was just kind of, there was like Wilco, Young the Giant, and festivals were so big then and fun and cool, and they just immediately went off.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really nice to see. They're like kind of a staple now at modern rock radio. I mean, they always have a song on the charts. It's really, really great to see them up there. And the streaming just gets like bigger and bigger. And, there's some placement all the time for My Body or Cough Syrup. It's great when you see that happen years later, that a song still has that much life and power in it. Jason Mraz that we did here in this room.
Love is a 4-letter word was the record.
Love is a 4-letter.
Got a Grammy too, right?
We were nominated for Best Engineered, Tony Maserati and myself, but we didn't win. But it was really a great experience. I mean, it was all, really studio musicians. Matt Chamberlain, Justin Mills Johnson played bass, Jeff Babco keyboards, Tim Pierce played guitar. It was it was just like the best guys, the best crew of people. Every day was just silliness here in the studio. And the most interesting and the most incredible thing about it, first of all, I mean, Jason's like the chillest, sweetest guy in the world with the most beautiful voice, and who can just sing like that day in and day out. It's just effortless for him. Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't say that. He works hard at it. And but he can deliver those vocals and background vocals every day. But the interesting thing was, I Won't Give Up, which was the biggest single from the record, was cut here on a Saturday afternoon. We had finished most of the record, and he was out on tour. I think I don't know where he was, but he was out on tour, came back in town. We had already done a version of the tune that was sort of a more up-tempo, blue-eyed soul version. And after the record company heard it and after Jason discussed it with the record label, we decided we would do a rather acoustic version of the tune that was actually going to just be a sort of teaser version for to announce the release of the record and sort of something for his fans to dig into, knowing that the record would be out in a few months. And so we came in here on a Saturday, same players, cut the track in a matter of 2 hours, did a couple of little overdubs. Jason did the vocal, and now Jason had just come off the road, weeks on the road, singing. It was just him and his percussionist on the road. So he's kind of carrying the load for all the shows. And I thought at the time, it was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I think we did the vocal. And I thought at the time, like, wow, maybe not his best vocal, because all the other vocals on the record were just really pristine and perfect. And this, he was a little sort of ragged, shall we say. And I remember playing it for the A&R guy and then for the president of the label, and I was nervous that maybe it wasn't up to the snuff of all the other vocals we had done on the record. And I thought he sounded a little vulnerable, maybe almost a little too weak. And the brilliance of Craig Kallman and Sam Reebok, after they heard the vocal, they were like, you know what? You're right. It's maybe not his strongest vocal. Maybe his tone isn't as beautiful as some of the others. But the weakness of it almost makes it a little more vulnerable, a little more compelling, a little bit more believable. And we were under a huge time pressure crunch to get the song done and out. So they were like, look, let's just run with it. And the thing I remember is it seemed like a week later, a week after release, they were 2 days after release, I think they were at 60,000 downloads. A week after release, they were at 250,000 downloads. And I'm not talking streams, I'm talking like physical downloads.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, in a matter of a week, 2 weeks, it's a runaway hit. And that's the acoustic version of the tune that was really meant to just be this little introductory,
Promo
almost
piece.
throwaway track.
Yeah.
And, today I think it's at 7 million sales. I think that the song is probably at a billion or so streams. So you just never know. So that Saturday afternoon, yielded this just huge hit for Jason. So that's an amazing thing. That's an amazing phenomenon,
Yeah.
So you just never ever know. Like sometimes you come in and you labor over stuff and you're really proud of it and every detail is perfect and you think this is the best record ever. Everybody's like, yeah, whatever.
What happened to the original version that had?
We actually ended up with about 3 or 4 different versions of the tune because it became such a sort of runaway hit. Different territories wanted different styles. We actually had a pop version of it. We had a blue-eyed soul version. We had the acoustic version. I think I even morphed together a few of those versions. I think we had one where there was like a stronger kick drum going all through it. There were about 5 different versions of the tunes to feed different radio markets and playlists and all.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
Yeah,
And
no, it's amazing. So there's a lot of magic that's happened in this room for me. We've talked about the Grace Kelly thing, where same deal. That song went down pretty quickly. Maybe the track and the vocal happened in a day, and a couple of overdubs the next day. I can't quite remember, but really, really quick. And often the best things go down when you're really not thinking about them too much, when you don't hold on so tightly, when you aren't trying so hard, when you just kind of let stuff happen, sometimes that's the best.
We as humans, we all have imperfections. We're all fucked up. We all do things we don't want to. But let's say you're having an argument with your wife or a friend, and you have to come in the studio at 10 a.m. and work with Rufus Wainwright. How do you... I can't do that. I need to have, even on my way here, I want to be sharp. You're my friend, and we work here at Sunset in close proximity, but I want to be sharp. I need to feel good about just talking with you. How do you put personal stuff aside when you have to come in here? And there's a charm element of being a producer. There's a calm portion of the pie that is so instrumental. How do you put things aside to be professional?
Yeah, it can be tough sometimes. I do think you have to learn to compartmentalize things.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it, that you really do have to leave all that outside the room, unless sometimes you're working with an artist who you're really close with, and you can kind of share those things. Yep. And it actually makes the bond between you even tighter. But a lot of times you really have to walk in and put on that producer face and be the cheerleader, be the optimist, and just full speed ahead.
What's the common thread when you're working with Elton John or Cherry Glazer? What's the common thread that producing a record is going to be for any genre artist, any personality that you've found over your decades of work?
It's getting out of the way, and getting out of the way of yourself, getting out of the way of the artist, just letting it happen, knowing when to step in, knowing when to sort of raise your hand and say, hey, what about? Or I'm not sure if this is working. I think I've made the mistake on a number of projects of being, too tight about the production and holding on to every detail and being so microscopic that I drove myself crazy and drove the artist crazy. So I think there's a way that you got to find a balance between letting go, letting things happen naturally, creating an environment where no matter what stress you're under, people don't see that you're under all that stress, whether it's the record company or something else in your life that's going on. You gotta keep that away from people, because then it starts to mess with their own creativity, their own vibe, their own flow in the studio. So that can be tricky, but I do think, I was lucky in that I got to work with a lot of those really great old school record producers as a young assistant engineer, like everybody from George Martin and Jerry Wexler and just countless others, Ken Scott and Frank Zappa even.
Wow.
And, I saw at times how when things were going smoothly, they just made sure they kept on going smoothly. But when things got on the wrong tangent or weren't going right or didn't fit the direction that they were trying to go in, that's when they'd just gently do a couple of things to get things back on track. And they always did it with such grace and were just such gentlemen about it and so invisible about it, not like, hey, I'm going to fix this. I'll get this back on. It was just, they'd say a couple of words, and then the next thing you knew, everything was great, smooth sailing. And you forgot about that last hour where everybody was lost,
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. They were really, really incredible.
Another producer named Greg Wells says sometimes he's weary about too much pre-production. He said that first take when you get in the room is just magical, always. You, on the other hand, love pre-production.
With bands, especially.
Yes.
The Jason Mraz stuff, there was no pre-production because it was all studio musicians. And the great thing about players that are that experienced, you can say, hey, let's try this, let's try that. And on a dime, they can change and try different things. Where a band that has its own sound, has its own democracy, you got to kind of slowly work towards a place. So I do tend to do much, much more pre-production with an actual rock band, if you will, than I would a solo artist that's just coming in with outside musicians. Sometimes I've done pre-production in those situations, but it's more important for me with bands. I mean, the thing with Greg, and, I love Greg. He is just one of the most talented producers, songwriters, musicians. He's just a force of nature. Mm-hmm. And with Greg, he's so intuitive that you got to stay out of the way. You got to have the drum sound before he sits down to play, and have a piano sound when he's going out there and noodling on piano just to get his fingers warmed up. You got to get a piano sound in 5 minutes, because chances are, he's going to do it in the first take.
Yeah.
I remember a situation years ago here with Ben Montench on a Lone Justice album that I did here at Sunset Sound.
Amazing keyboard piano player. Played with Tom Petty
and the Heartbreakers.
Yes, exactly.
And so many studio albums he's played on. Dixie Chicks and
Bryan
so many
Adams.
different things. Yeah. And I remember this was analog tape. And I remember rolling the track. Benmont said, just roll it. I think I got a sense of the form of it now. Just kind of roll the track. And I remember he played something in the intro that was so great. And he made it a point to tell me before we started, don't record this. I'm just going to fuck around. I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes. Don't record this. And the first 4 bars of the intro went by, and what he played was so magnificent. I was like, I don't care what this guy said. I'm throwing this in record. And he got through the whole track. It was brilliant. And then he went, by any chance, did you record that? And I said, yeah, Benmont. It was pretty great. I didn't get the intro, but I got everything else. I got the second half of the intro. Maybe you can figure out what you played in the first half based on that. And he said, oh, thank you. We went back, listened to the 3 or 4 bars I'd captured of the intro, figured out what the part was. We punched in the intro, and it was it. But players like that, their first impression is gonna be the magic. Not always, but a lot of times.
What do you do when you're producing a record and the demos are just as good, are good enough to just be the master?
I mean, the great thing now, they're the master.
Yeah.
You just take the demo and you work on them.
Does the producer mind of you feel like, I got to get in here and fuck with this a little bit?
Of course you do. Yeah. You want to own it. You want to be a part of it. But, the great thing now is everybody's got the same technology. Everybody's got some system at home that they can build great demos. And, maybe you replace the drum sounds, or maybe you redo a part here and there for a better sound, a better performance, or whatever it is. But there's no such thing as a demo anymore.
What do you look for in demos? You, for decades, have been listening to demos, and you have a career that you've actually broke so many bands based on your instincts. What do you look for in demos? And please just don't say different.
It's a vibe. No, it's a vibe.
Gotcha.
You just kind of, I don't know. It's like you read a great book,
it hits
see
you.
a great movie. It just connects with you in some way. And I think, you got to feel like, well, if I'm this affected by this, then chances are a lot of other people will be similarly
That's simple.
affected.
Does it move you? Does it touch you? Yes, I love that. God, you need to be reminded of that. Do you ever feel, though, you're listening to something and it might not move you, but you're like, this would do really well in the marketplace right now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the opposite,
for this.
The opposite happens too. There's something that, I get. And I think producers can hear very raw demos that perhaps A&R people can't hear, or the average listener can't hear. I think they can kind of see through it. They can see the steps that they need to take to get it to a place of a more finished record, a presentation that people will understand a little better. So I can hear things in a very raw form and instantly go, whoa, there's a vibe here. There's something going on here. There's a heart here, there's just something that's coming through the speakers that touches me. And it doesn't matter how rough the production is or unfinished, you just kind of know, and there have been a number of artists that over the years, that I've heard in those sort of embryonic states who have, gone on to get record deals. And
what you're about to hear is one of the greatest stories ever. Speaking of demos, you were selling some Anvil cases in Easy Reader magazine or something? Or?
There used to be a Recycler magazine, which was basically like the Craigslist on paper in the 90s.
So you're selling these cases. Somebody calls you to buy the cases. You go and meet up. You drive over, thinking nothing of it. They find out that you're a record producer, a successful one, and they say, oh my gosh, let me give you this tape of a band. The band's name is Weezer. And you say, okay, the guy was nice. I'm going to put this tape here. I'll take it from him. Go.
all true. Matt Sharp came over to the studio I was working at to buy some Anvil cases and said, hey, can I give you my band's tape? And he gave me the tape, and the tape sat in the side pocket of my car for a couple of weeks. I had every intention to listen to it, but didn't get around to it right away. And one day I was going to take the car in for a car wash, and I thought, I should listen to this or just organize the stuff in the side pockets. And it was a Saturday morning. I'll never forget. I put the cassette in, and, Sweater Song and all those classics were on there. And I was just, what the hell? And I immediately, right then, it was like 11 o'clock in the morning, called up Matt and said, hey, this stuff is great. I want to hear your band. I want to meet your band. And he said, oh, we all live in this house in West LA, come on over. So I think that afternoon I went right over, and they all had this house that they lived and practiced in. They had the garage tricked out as a rehearsal room. And, so I followed them around town for a while, many gigs, brought a dozen A&R people down to shows. Most A&R people didn't get it. 9 out of 10 did not get it. They felt like the vocals were a little too rough, or, the band was new. They were 6 months maybe alive in the clubs at that point, but I championed them for the longest time until finally somebody at Geffen Records had heard about it, and they got involved and eventually signed the band. But I had one small label, Enigma, Restless Records, interested at the time, but most of the majors didn't get it. Even some of the majors said, I don't hear the songs. And I was kind of like, what? How can you not hear those songs?
This is like Say It Ain't So was on those demos.
Say everything but Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly they wrote later, but all those tunes were there.
That was their breakout hit, right?
Yeah.
Buddy Holly?
Yeah. Same thing, a few years prior to that, I had engineered, co-produced a Pat Benatar record, and Patty's manager had this new band from the South that he was championing and sent me the songs. He said, I can't get this band arrested. They play these frat parties and these clubs down in the Carolinas, and they're blowing up, but I cannot get them a record deal. Will you listen to this stuff and see what you think? And he sent me this tape, and I was just like, wow, these songs are great. I kind of said, Rick, it's a little straight for my musical taste, but I think these songs are hits. I love this guy's voice. I think it's great. Let me send it around to people. I sent it around to a bunch of record labels, spent 6-9 months trying to get something going for them. No one wanted it. No one wanted it until they made such a huge scene in the Southeast kind of college circuit that record companies started to see the numbers that were showing up at their gigs, and Atlantic Records sent down an A&R person to see one of the shows, and that was Hootie and the Blowfish.
Wow.
So, you know, it's you hear a demo, you just get that feeling like, you know,
That's wild.
I think a lot of people are going to like this song, you know?
That was crazy because that was like Dave Matthews too. You know, the tape
Same
trading
thing.
thing in the '90s, and like you know
Yep.
that they even took the Grateful Dead. The Dave Matthews Band took the Grateful Dead approach of live taping at their shows. They encouraged it because then
right.
all the tape trading in the colleges, and the
Everybody
dubbing-
knew of it.
Yep.
The whole southeast of the country lived this band before anybody outside that region knew of them.
Yep. And their manager for the Dave Matthews Band, who I'm interviewing next week, is Corin Capshaw.
Yep.
Who owned a little nightclub called Trax, and now he's one of the most powerful people in the music industry
Yep.
with ACO Records, Red Light Management, who has everybody on there, and he's
Alabama Shakes and so many other things
Yeah.
over the years. My Morning Jacket, so many
Yep.
other things that they've found and developed. Great label, great manager.
That's all we need to do for that. Icky Thump, White Stripes. You engineer the whole record. Jack produces it. It's one of the greatest things, not just in music, but in the world ever. For me, I've listened to that song, the title track, Icky Thump, maybe 400 million times, 6 times today. The kick drum on that, I feel like I'm in the movie Braveheart and we're going out to battle and avenge our fallen brothers' deaths, and it's just boom, boom, boom. The story of how you met Jack White, the demos, how you guys went into Nashville, Tennessee, Blackbird Studio D, which we were just at last weekend, or for John McBride's amazing platform. How did Jack contact you? Or how did you meet Jack White?
I met Jack through his manager, Ian Montone. Ian was managing the Shins, who I had just produced an album for.
Wow.
And Ian was kind enough to really love that Wincing the Night Away album that I did for the Shins, and said, hey, I want to introduce you to Jack White. And Jack called me up and said, hey, you know, I have to do this solo track. It's a Hank Williams song where they found a manuscript. They found a number of manuscripts of unfinished Hank Williams songs where he wrote the lyrics but never recorded anything. So it was up to Jack to actually come up with the chord changes and the melody and really finish the song. And yeah, it was pretty amazing.
What song was that?
Bob Dylan, what's that?
Well, that's Old Crow Medicine Show, what they did with the Bob Dylan lyrics, too.
Exactly.
Same thing. Yeah.
Similar kind of thing. That's right.
But what song was the Jack White track?
You Don't Know, I think was the name of it.
Okay.
So we went into Blackbird for a day or so and did this track to, he had a 2-inch 8-track machine that sounds amazing, one-of-a-kind machine, and recorded it live to that. And, Jack and I got on just great, and, called me thereafter and said, hey, I got to do a White Stripes record. Are you interested in doing it? And of course, being a fan, I was like, yeah, I'd love to take a part in that.
So they're in Detroit then, right?
Jack had already moved to Nashville. Meg was still in Detroit, yeah.
The White Stripes, the partnership between them two is obviously one of the greatest things ever. The groove that they created is so iconic. How do you describe Meg and Jack White?
Just perfect musical chemistry. She fully understood where he wants to go with a tune, where he wants to go with the dynamics, the tempo, the groove. They were just so locked. When you're in the studio and there's great players, great connection between the players. This thing happens that's bigger than everybody that's a part of it. It just magnifies. It sounds like God. It just sounds amazing. And there have been a number of times, Elton John and other people I've worked with where I've had that sensation of like, what just happened? How is that possible? You know, a minute ago it sounded like rubble and you don't know where you're going. And then the next thing, it just all connects and boom, it's magical. Meg and Jack, when they were on, just no one will ever be the White Stripes other than the two of them. Yeah. It's just a pretty incredible combination. The simplicity of her parts and the power and her ability to just float with him tempo-wise, it was just magical. Really, really magical. Every day.
So he's with Daru Jones now, who's a fucking amazing drummer, but completely different than Meg.
Whole different thing. Whole different sound, whole different vibe. I love his drumming. I think he's really inventive and got a groove and just comes from a whole other place. And Jack sounds great with him, but he sounds different. He doesn't sound like the same Jack White in the White Stripes.
What if you had Daru Jones and Studio D and Icky Thump? What would what kind of record would that have made?
Yeah, it would have definitely been a more active groove. It would have been a busier, maybe edgier, maybe, part of it is the magic of that is it's so back on the beat. It's so, the thing that gives it the power is that it's just got so much tension in there. Yeah. And, with another drummer, it's just a different thing. When I recorded the Raconteurs with Jack, Patrick Healer is a fantastic drummer. He's like Keith Moon or something. He's really one of the best drummers I've ever recorded. But it's really different. It would never be the White Stripes. It just wouldn't be that tone.
How much pre-production did you do on Icky Thump for the whole record? Were you in Detroit then, going up and seeing them?
No. They did a couple of afternoons, I think, at Jack's house, just rehearsing the tunes, him showing Meg the riffs, and it was pretty much all done in the studio. I mean, the great thing that I love about Jack or Elton John or anybody that really works fast, it forces you to really be in the moment and be intuitive and not overthink, not get too wound up. And Jack is always like, I got an idea, let's do this, bang, let's do the next thing, bang, let's do the next thing. Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics, same thing, never really overthinks anything. It's all from the gut. It's all like, that first take that we were talking about earlier. It's just going for it and then moving on and going for it and moving on and not looking back. At some point you can stop and go, okay, wait a minute, too many ideas, let's lose these, or let's lose that in the verse, keep that in the chorus, and you can do a little editing. But there's something about when you work at that quick pace where you don't get to overthink anything, like the Jason Mraz track that was done in an afternoon because it was a throwaway almost. And even, we talked about the Young the Giant record. Wasn't a lot of overthinking on that record because they didn't have the budget to do it. We had to get it done. I think the budget was $75,000 maybe all in, top to bottom for that record. Because it was, it was Roadrunner Records. It was a new band, and I think that's what was spent on it.
What was the budget for Icky Thump?
I don't remember. I mean, hard to say. And I mean, I do remember this. I do remember Jack licensing the record and getting a healthy fee for licensing the record. And a number of people in the industry at the time thought like, wow, that's incredible that they were able to make that kind of deal for this license. But they paid the license back in a matter of a week or two of release because it was so successful,
Wow.
So
how's he do his vocals? Because it's so charismatic and just amazing. Is he in a vocal booth all overdubs?
A couple of the vocals might have been live on the White Stripes record. Most of them overdubbed. Icky Thump definitely took a little bit of work because there's two lead vocals really that are going kind of back and forth in the tune. So it took a little while to get that. They were deliberately mic'd differently and treated differently to be almost like a kind of Zeppelin thing. And we definitely, Jack was very particular about the distortion on his voice, getting it to break up in a way that was exciting and, as he would call it, Little Richard-like sounding. Because if you remember all those old records from the 50s and early 60s, they were all so distorted and blown up that it added to this sense of energy and danger, And so we were always kind of chasing that a little bit.
Tracking to tape too.
All tracked to 16-track analog tape. Yeah.
Raconteurs as well. Tape.
Raconteurs was two 16-track machines locked together, and the only reason we really did the second machine was that there were a lot of backgrounds. Brendan was brilliant at really, trying different background parts and orchestrating a lot of like the harmonies. So we needed a lot of tracks for those. No Pro Tools.
And he's on Fender amps, those clean lower tones, and they're really aggressive. What's the other amp?
Pretty much Jack's sound then was a Fender Twin. In fact, I think it was a 70s Silverface Fender Twin that, was barely on 2 or 3. I'm sorry?
Silvertone?
He had a Silvertone amp as well. Okay. The Fender Twin was a Silverface, the later 70s, and he also had a Silvertone 1485, I think, which is the bigger piggyback one that was kind of meant to be a bass amp. Mm-hmm. And he would kind of have it EQ to a certain extent where the low end came from the Silvertone, but the meat of the tune, the mid-range of the sound really, really came from the Fender Twin.
Wow. How long were you guys in studio for?
I think there were some starts and stops in the sessions, definitely a break before we mixed it. It didn't seem like long, maybe a month overall. I can't really remember.
Yeah.
I think we did a few extra tunes, and there were some tunes that we maybe cut once or twice, recut them. I know the whole mix for the album took like 5 days. I was pretty much mixing like 2 songs, maybe even 3 songs in a day. It was really quick mixing because it was only, it's a 2-piece. It's only 16 tracks, 15 tracks actually. And it went down pretty quickly.
He's had such an incredible career. He reinvents himself. He really knows what his fans want too, and he gets off on that. And
he really gets off on that.
Performance is amazing.
He's great, and he's performing when he gets in the studio, when he solos, when he sings. He's going for it. He's not shy. He's got, he's got a great sense of confidence in terms of really where he knows where he wants to go with the record. And there were songs on that record, Raconteur's record, where he knew the moment he walked in the studio at 10:30 what he wanted to do that day, where he was going, and just kind of went for it.
That's so cool. You're a producer engineer. Actually are one of the greatest engineers. And how I know that, because you're so humble, but when I talk to other engineers, they have such praise to you. And these are people like Nick Launay and Greg Wells and Joe Barresi, who does Tool. Like, they just think you're the shit.
I don't know, because I think I'm clueless, dude. I think I'm totally clueless. I am terrified every single day that I get behind the console. I have to summon all the gods to get something that I feel is acceptable. It's just, I don't know. It's funny. Engineering is something that I don't really feel that confident about. I always feel like, it's it's a means to an end. I know where I want to go, but I don't always know the steps to get there. I'm kind of technically, I'm flailing all the time, just trying to make something connect and get to this place where I go, oh yeah, that's what I'm trying to get this artist to sound like. That's the place. But if you told me the ABCD to get there, I don't know. I'm usually throwing a bunch of things together and hoping that it works,
Yeah.
And luckily I've done this enough now that I do have a lot of knowledge to grab from in terms of getting a different sound or a different approach or a simple approach to recording, or as opposed to a more complicated one for another project. So, but still, I really, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely a struggle. Like every tracking date, every mix is a struggle. You fight and fight for that last 1 dB of 15,000 cycles on the top. Is it enough air? Is it too much air? Does it make it sound too slick, or is it now too closed down and the vocal doesn't feel alive enough? It's like every inch is like a battle.
Do you think all great artists have a little bit of imposter syndrome?
I don't know if they all do. I think
Do
I
you?
do. Are you kidding me? What I just said?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I feel like, when are they going to find me out? I just think maybe because it isn't easy for you, you feel like you're not confident in your abilities. I'm not sure.
Do you think that creates something inside of an artist also?
I think it's part of your drive. Yeah. I think it's kind of the thing that pushes you forward, because you're constantly looking behind your back going like, please don't let them find out that I am clueless. Seriously.
What makes a great record producer? Briefly, in one sentence, in one word.
Oh boy. I think a lot of it is being a fan of the artist, believing in the artist. I think it's enthusiasm. All the technical stuff you learn comes later. I think you just have to want to get in there and kill for the artist and really make them shine. I'm a 13, 14-year-old kid still, opening up that shrink wrap for the first time on an album, and as a fan you're going like, wow, I hope it's as good as the last one, or maybe it's even better, or that one song I heard on the radio from the new album sounded kind of weird. I don't know what to think. I think there's part of you that has to be that, where you're like rooting for the artists and protecting them and just wanting to make them look good. And then you want to go out and tell all your friends about it and how good this record was. And that translates to, you want to reach as many people by what you do in the studio. I always think about that. Like, how can I take Cherry Glazer from being this LA cult favorite to something much bigger, that the audiences are going from 200 in a club to 2,000 in a concert hall. And I always think of like, how can I expand it? How can I make it more cinematic? How can I get more people to have the enthusiasm that I have about this particular artist?
Gosh. Perfectly said. Love that. Let's play a little game. In one word, one phrase, one sentence, tell me why these next 5 producers are great producers. Okay?
Okay.
Butch Vig.
Wow. Everything he does is just classic. Needless to say, Nirvana, Foo Fighters, Pumpkins. When I heard the Pumpkins, Gish, let alone Siamese Dream, Gish alone, I was like, this is turning a corner. This is reinventing something. This is taking what was grunge alternative, which was an indie, small audience, a niche, and turning it into something that is global. Same thing I was just talking about, reaching people. Butch had this way, still has this way of doing it where he still makes records that are totally honest and true to the artist, but they are so huge. Garbage. We forgot about garbage.
Yeah.
What else? That's not one word.
Gosh, I saw Billy Corgan down in Nashville, and we were talking about him. That's why he was the first one on the list. But gish, I have the Smashing Pumpkins tattoo on my heart. I'm from Chicago. That
Of
band
course, you know
meant so much to me
that was
growing up.
the city. Yep.
Yeah, and there's two kinds of people. You either get the Smashing Pumpkins or you don't.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, that's how I feel.
Oh
anyways.
no, from that first record on, I'm just like, what?
Completely different producer, George Martin, the Beatles.
Well, obviously, the fifth Beatle, brilliant arranger, put the extra musicality into that band. And the wonderful thing was how he himself morphed with them over the times. Like, you know, those records are all different, very different experiences. And somehow he put himself in every one of them in the best way. And having worked with him as an assistant engineer with Jeff Emmerich, I mean, he was the ultimate gentleman. And again, only got involved when he needed to get involved.
Would the Beatles be the Beatles without George Martin?
Yeah,
Definitely.
absolutely.
To the degree of what they are in 23 now?
Who knows?
Yeah.
But I think they would have been huge. I think the times were right for it. You know, when you think of the early Beatles, the innocence of those songs, the world was in a place where it was ready for the whole British phenomenon to happen.
You came up in the 80s, and your class that you kind of came up with like a Nico Bolas, but in this room, 1977, the band Van Halen comes in. Ted Templeman was the producer. Did you know Ted Templeman much?
I never knew Ted or Don. Loved their work. I was a huge fan of all those Warner Brothers records at the time. The stuff that Ted Templeman did, Russ Titleman, Lenny Waronker. Those are all just classic records. And those producers, you know, all those sort of in-house producers, they all went from genre to genre. One day they're doing Maria Muldaur, and the next day they're doing Van Halen, and then they're doing Ry Cooder, or they're it's brilliant.
Did you know Lenny Waronker?
Very well.
He's amazing.
I love Lenny. He's talk about great A&R man. He's exactly what you want. He has your back all the time. You will make a better album if Lenny is involved. And, you know, he may say two things in the course of the album, but they will make the record better.
Yeah, he was very instrumental in Gary Clark Jr.'s Warner Brothers. That was one of his last things before he stepped down, kind of. He's fully retired now, right?
I think so. I think knowing Lenny, he's probably got his hands in things.
Yeah.
He's scouting talent, doing something.
But the music from Warner Brothers for the last 5 decades is overseen by Lenny Waronker. Yeah,
Great.
DreamWorks. Let's go a different genre. Mark Ronson.
Love Mark, even though he beat me out for Producer of the Year Grammy. But
Which one?
I was nominated for Producer of the Year the same year that he won for Amy Winehouse. But of course, may the better man win. He deserved it. That record is timeless. Just the idea of getting the Daptones involved, just brilliant. Like, everything about those records, Back in Black. It's Back to Black, I should say. It's just great, just great.
But why is he a great producer, Mark Ronson?
Wow, I think if anybody can create something that is that timeless and that cuts across all genres, cuts across all types of people, I mean, and he got you to love her. You know, I mean, he really brought out performances in her where you just loved her as an artist, as a person, as a storyteller. You felt her. Great stuff. Down even to the recent couple of years ago, Queens of the Stone Age record he did. That was a really unusual pairing, but he brought some really unique things to that record.
I didn't know he did
Yeah.
Queens of the Stone Age.
I think the last album. I'm spacing out on the name of it. Sorry.
Have you ever been in the studio and you've heard a song being tracked or a vocal go down and it's brought you to tears?
Always.
Name one song that you've produced.
Rufus Wainwright. You know, I was in the studio countless times with Rufus, and the performances were, yeah, you couldn't help but hold back, but fight the tears. I mean, it was just incredible. Etta James, same thing. I mean, she was the blues. She had the blues. My hair is standing up, you know, incredible. Elton, yeah, it's just I've been fortunate to be in the room in those moments many times where, like I say, the song just transcends the equipment, the people, everything. It just cuts through it all and reaches you on some base mathematical, emotional level that you can't explain.
Beautifully said. I knew the answer to that, but I was just wanted to hear you say it. So your work ethic is simply insane. You're here 6 days a week, mixing, tracking, meeting with artists, meeting with A&Rs. How does that affect your personal life?
Luckily, I have a partner who is really tolerant. She's really great about that. She encourages it. She knows when something is important, and she knows when it's not important. And she'll tell me that you don't need to do that. You know, somebody else can do that for you. You can get your assistant to do that, or whatever it is. Gosh. So she's just very understanding.
You have to have that as a partner, and if you're going to be in this field. That when I interviewed Mike Persanti, you know, him talking about coming up and just being in here 20 hours a day, sometimes sleeping here, and having a girlfriend at the same time. I mean, I'm dealing with something like that right now, where it's just like the jealousy of something else taking time away, and I'm just not even. I care about somebody, but I don't even want to give them the time because I'm taking away from this passion, this drive. I have to do this, and it's so difficult because then you feel like I'm not doing something to this person, this girl, but I'm not doing anything for her.
Right, I'm not putting you in second place, but this is who I am. It's my fabric. It's my makeup, and I can't help but serve that.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think that? And every engineer, producer, or kid in recording school that's watching this right now, do you think that if you can't find somebody to go through decades of work like you have that is completely understanding and gets it, that's not the right person for you?
I'm not a relationship expert, clearly.
Damn it. For the 18-year-old kid out there that's about to go into music business school or recording school, or just likes to write songs with his friends, what's the first step of becoming a producer? Practice, working with bands?
No, write and write again. Just write more songs. Get out to as many people as you can. Meet people. Share your work. Don't be precious about your work. Just the more situations you can put yourself in, the better.
Yeah, but there's nothing better than getting a hit as a producer.
Ultimately, yeah. And sadly, because, you know, then you're judged basically on what you've done over the last 6 months. And no one really cares about what you did 6 years ago. They're concerned about what your last hit was. Yeah. And, you know, that's not always the best way to judge somebody's ability.
Would you rather produce a record that was, let's say, Kings of Leon, giant rock band, Foo Fighters, somebody of that caliber? Would you rather produce Kings of Leon's first record, which you've been in many situations similar to that, and then they've completely broken, or would you rather produce them right now in 2023?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's similar kind of thing. I mean, you know, when you're first starting out, there's a sense of innocence and naivete that sometimes makes for more interesting records because you make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes mistakes can lead to very, very unique situations. You know, if you've done a number of records before, maybe you get a little jaded, or you feel like you have to control the process a little bit more than you need to. So there's pitfalls to both. I don't really have a preference. I mean, to me, it's just working with a great artist. I've done 5 albums with Morrissey, and he's as enthusiastic about doing this next record as he was the very first album we did together 10 years ago. He still has that passion and that drive, and wants to up himself, and still feels like he hasn't made his best record yet. So I think that's, you can always have that in your life, that drive. And I don't know if it matters if it's you're 2 albums into your career or 10 albums into your career.
The personality of the artist or the band, though, is vastly different from coming in on a first record as opposed to their 6th.
Of course.
It's got to be a little bit more fun when they're just starting off.
Yeah, there's that ignorance is bliss phase where you just do a lot of dumb things just because you can do them. And I think you perhaps put limits on yourself as you get further in your career. And I don't know if I should do that. It might not be wise. My fan base might not like that. Yeah, maybe you put a little bit more checks and balances. But I don't know. I've kind of worked with artists that are, very, very settled in their career and have their sound and have their audience. We did an Alanis Morissette album here, and it was such a pleasure working with her because she really understands her audience, her music. She's committed to what she wants to say. The album was very interesting in that she started it at home with Guy Sigsworth, who's a songwriter, producer who she works with often. And she kind of got a little into the process and felt like the record was too electronic, as she put it, that there wasn't enough humanity in the record. And she wanted to take some of the programming that she had done at home and then bring her band in and add that to the record and strike this balance between the electronic side of it and a real band side of it. And it was great. It was a great exercise for me because I was able to really take these, what you might call a demo that she did at home, and then she gave me all the freedom in the world to chop them up, change the song structures, add sections, bring the band in, keep some of the programming, put more programming on, dump it all. So that's 6 or 8 albums into her career, and she has no fear about taking what she's done. She wasn't precious about it. She wasn't afraid that she'd lose something if she just dove in deeper to this record. That's the thing that's really exciting to me is when I work with an artist who's absolutely fearless and doesn't put restraints on themselves, that they're just willing to try anything. And that's, like you say, with a new artist, there is that sense of like, what the hell? We're here. Yeah, let's just do this goofy thing. I always had this idea to do this goofy idea of putting 6 guitars in different tunings on top of each other or whatever it is. And you just do this stuff and see what happens. But you don't have to lose that as you get further into your career.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, she's so tremendous too. Vocally, the style, it's so unique, her personality. How long did you work with her for? Is that a couple of weeks?
No, I think we took a good month or 2 in here. Nice. Between all the tracking, mixing, and everything. She was very fast doing vocals. What was amazing for me is that when we started doing vocals, she said that all her records, usually she writes the song, then goes in and sings it in one take, and that's the vocal. So for her to do more than maybe 2 takes on a vocal was extraordinary to her. She would never really take that much time. It was more like, I have this idea, this feeling, this thing I want to communicate. Bang, I go in, do it. That's it. And, I don't labor over it. So it was interesting to see her connect with that inspiration for the tune and then just go in and send the message. It's beautiful.
Vocals are such a personal issue for an artist.
Yeah.
How delicate do you have to be with a female artist or a male artist in a room when producing their vocals?
Yeah, vocals are a very personal, sensitive thing for some people. Some people, they just want to go in, one take, kill it. Elton John I did an album with, and for him, he had to kind of get himself in this space where he understood technically what he needed to do to sing the tracks. He would go in, he'd walk in the studio with blinders on, go right to the microphone, nail it in one, maybe two takes, and then he would know where he messed up. And he'd say to you, can you get me to the bridge? I want to punch in the third line. Can you get me to the last chorus? I was sharp on this one word. Can we punch that in? And I mean, he just has such presence, he's so in the moment. He really delivers a vocal that is so passionate, so big, and you hear that voice come out of the speakers, and it's just like Elton John. It's what you grew up with as a little kid,
Yeah.
and it's so powerful. His piano playing, he is incredible how intense he is and how fast he is. I mean, he writes the songs in the studio, does the vocal, adds the rhythm section, and it's done. And like a Prince track, it's done in a day.
Immediately what I thought of.
Yeah, exactly. And, like I was saying earlier, there's that thing of not thinking too much, of just getting in the right headspace, connecting with it, and doing it, and move on.
Do you think there's a sense of confidence in an artist like that
Absolutely
has to be there for that to happen?
And however, what was interesting with Elton, he had to get to this place where he was confident, not distracted, uber focused on it. And when he was there, done. Fast. 3.5 minute song, done in 3.5 minutes.
Wow. That's so rad. What I really want to convey some just methods for kids out there, or for people starting off in the music industry. What are some characteristics of a producer to work with an artist about their vocals? Patience, obviously, encouragement.
I think definitely being supportive, enthusiastic, being a fan, but I also think flexibility in your method is really important. Some people like to work line by line. Some people like to work, they want to go in, do all the choruses, and then do the verses. Some people want to go in, one take, top to bottom, do it. Everybody has a sort of method that they're comfortable with. And then you have to judge as a producer, because maybe they have this method that they like, but maybe it doesn't yield the best results or the most exciting results. And then you got to be able to say, okay, great, we got everything, we worked this, we punched in word at a time and got something that you're really happy with. I like it, I think it's great. Now I want you to try doing a few more takes where you just go in top to bottom, do the whole song, the absolute opposite of what we just did. Take 15 minutes, let's see what it brings. Sometimes you get something that's better, sometimes you get a chorus or a verse that's better because it's not so precise. Mm-hmm. And you got to be kind of willing to roll with things. There's been artists that I've worked with that have wanted to do the vocals on their own without my involvement, and your first reaction to that is like, wait a minute, this is the lead vocal. This is the most important thing. Of course I got to be a part of it. But you have to trust that, I mean, we did a Spoon album in here.
They're nominated for a Grammy this year.
I know, it's fantastic. I'm so proud of them. So we did 2014, I think. We did an album here called They Want My Soul here in Studio One, cut all the tracks here. Spent, I don't know, 2 weeks maybe here. And then we went to Jim Eno's studio in Austin where the band is based and did all the overdubs there. And Britt, prior to that, I had done a few songs with Divine Fits, which is one of Britt's side projects. And he wanted to do the vocals on his own without my involvement. And I just said, look, I'm fine with that as long as you're okay with me hearing that vocal. And then I'm going to offer you some critique. I might love it and say, don't change a thing. I might want you to change stuff. And he said, absolutely. Yeah. And he was super cool in that, he just wanted to get in his zone and do the vocal, and then was absolutely open to any feedback. And sometimes I'd say, I'm not sure of the phrasing here, or I'm not sure of, if it's intense enough here, those kind of things. And we'd be like, okay, I'll try some more. Try this, go punch it in, and great, egoless about it, and always bettered the song.
You're there to facilitate the artist, their art, but your name goes on at the end of the day. When it gets out of your hands like that with a lead vocal, do you get a little nervous? Like, what?
Well, of course you do. Yeah. No, of course you do. But you've got to be the one. You're at the end of the day. When you hand it over to the record company and play it for them, you're representing this, so you've got to be there to defend it and to praise it and to believe in it. Yeah. So if you don't believe in a vocal or a rhythm track or whatever, you've got to be able to say to the artist, like, I think we should cut this again. I don't think we really nailed this song. Let's try a different approach. In fact, on the last Morrissey album, there were a couple of tracks that we cut in France when we were cutting the whole record that I never quite felt like we got them right. So we came in here with some of the players from the band and some outside players and redid the tracks and got great results. And, Morrissey was happy. Everybody was happy. But I think, you've got to have that communication with the artist that you can say, I think there's something more in this song. I think we can do a better job. I think this could be better. That could be better. I like to be able to defend myself properly in my opinions and say, look, I think the bass line isn't melodic enough here. I think the drum part's too busy here. I think, the bridge, instead of it being big and grand, I think it should be the opposite. I think it should be simple and intimate. And I'd like to try a new version with all those things in mind, and hopefully we get it.
Let's give you a scenario. ATO Records contacts your manager and puts you with a band. They're a great band that's had success, but you come in and the lead singer is a cocaine addict. How do you deal with drugs and alcohol in the studio as the producer?
Luckily,
and I know you've experienced that many a times.
Yes, I have. Luckily, it's something I haven't had to deal with in a long time. I mean, the music business is such now that, people don't have the extravagant budgets and income to blow it on drugs. And most people are pretty serious about their careers and don't want to waste them. Yeah. So it doesn't happen that often. But, it just means more patience on your part. And, I've had situations where I've known that somebody had an issue and, I might even have to make sure I got performances out of them early in the day before their habit got the best of them later in the day, whether it was drinking or whatever it was. And you just deal with it. And I've had situations that have gone really bad where I had to actually, get somebody like Music Cares to intervene and help out. And I've seen the great thing is when you see somebody come through all that, if it's rehab or just on their own straightening things out, they're a different human being. They're not the same person that you worked with. And it's pretty incredible to see that transformation and to see how they can sort of, appreciate life again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've a lot of experience in so many ways with drugs and alcohol, and especially recovery. But even Nico Bolas and I were talking the other day. I was like, we should do something on sobriety or trying, to highlight, getting through drugs and alcohol, because it's like even the studio, for instance, this room was held Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison. Both died of drugs and alcohol.
That's right.
Studio 3, Prince, drugs. Studio 2, Van Halen. I mean, Eddie just, destroyed his body, his career. And it's just everybody.
Yeah.
And it's like,
But times were different. You know, that was kind of sort of what people did then. Yeah. And people weren't as knowledgeable about the consequences. And they are now. And I do think people take care of themselves, respect themselves a little bit more than they did then. So thankfully, there's not that issue doesn't come up that often.
Yeah. Scary position for you to be in too, because you're
responsible for the project. You're responsible if you go over budget, and if you're taking forever to cut tracks because I don't know, the drummer does a chemical issue. At some point, the record company is going to say, "Whoa, how come we're spending 3 weeks cutting basic tracks and something that should have taken 10 days?" I don't understand this. And, sometimes you're in that awkward position where you can't go and say, well, the drummer's got a chemical problem and we spent all this money, sitting around the studio while he was high and couldn't perform. Just can't do that.
Yeah. Have you had any, do you smoke weed ever or anything?
Of course. I all of the above at one point in time in my life.
Yeah.
But I'm lucky in that I don't have that addiction gene.
It's a disease, yeah.
I just, it's always been moderation. And
I've been out with you, 1 drink, 2 maybe.
But it was a double.
Amazing. Oh, that's great. So then something I want to talk to you, because you are an East Coast guy, and the nostalgia of the 1980s in New York City. Also talking about Morrissey, a lot of people don't know, he was the frontman of a band called The Smiths. Talk to me about the 80s. Just get me in there for a minute. Like, what was it like? Where were you at your career? 1985.
85. I had been in LA a few years. And, for me, what was great when I first came here, punk rock was just blowing up. And any night of the week, you could go out and see Black Flag or the Minutemen or, Dickies or whomever it was. It was fantastic, the scene. And there was such energy. And I mean, for me, like the Clash transformed my life. That was, the late 70s. That was my band, because I just thought it was this great combination of grooves, but really smart lyrics. Talking Heads, one of my all-time favorites. Same thing. Like, I think for me, what's exciting is when you can mix genres and you can kind of borrow from a lot of different places and make it all make sense together. Peter Gabriel did that. David Bowie did that. That's really exciting to me. So that energy definitely was here in LA. It was definitely in New York in the early 80s, late 70s. What was going on at CB's and all the clubs in New York was fantastic. And the level of musicianship, and also the fact that every one of those artists sounded so different from the next. Like, you could see Blondie, the Ramones, the Talking Heads. They were all phenomenal, but so unique. Yeah. Really had their own sound, their own personality.
Did you see the Police back in those
Yeah,
days?
yeah. Not in a club setting. I saw them
Okay,
later.
that's what I was
Yeah,
asking.
yeah.
But I mean, even their sound was it had so many different elements to it, from like reggae to punk to how would you?
But that was all right. It was great to borrow from I worked with Oingo Boingo and Stan Ridgway of Wall of Voodoo and all those 80s acts when I first came up, and everybody, there was this zeal, this desire to hear lots of different music, from whether it was dub or world music or punk or classic 70s rock. There was no reason that you couldn't dive into that and appropriate some of that, or at least you could let it filter into your music. There was no, you can't do that. There was no such thing as that,
What were some producers of punk that you kind of looked up to that were doing Pennywise, Black Flag, those kind of groups?
Martin Rushington, and all the guys that did the early records in the UK. I mean, I was really kind of focused on records that came out of Britain, because I think that people made bolder records. They took more chances. They were just kind of more in your face. It seemed like in the States, everybody was looking to make the perfect, pristine, hi-fi record, where everybody in England was really willing to throw that all away and make something that just made you kind of stand up and take notice. And so that was really, really interesting. And records were being made, in basement studios, really kind of, ghetto lo-fi kind of recordings. And they became huge hits. When you go back and listen to the first Police records or Joy Division, some of those records are really funky sounding, but they just had such a vibe, and they had the tools that they had were so much fewer than what we have now. No plugins, obviously. No, you had maybe a reverb and a digital delay and a Roland Space Echo or whatever it was, and you really made unique stuff. And that's always like a interesting thing that for me is that when you're limited to the tools that you have, you somehow come up with more interesting things, You're forced to use those tools in a way that they weren't designed to be used, and you come up with something much, much more interesting.
Gosh, I love listening to you talk. It's so great. I mean, what I do here, just in-house producing, and, I produce indie records, nothing even close to what you do, but just getting able to talk to people on a daily basis like you and Greg Wells and Nick Launay and just other producers that come down, Shooter Jennings, it's the amount of knowledge I pick up on is just amazing, because you just have such experience, The gentleman running this sound right now, Andrew, he reached out to you from Canada. Obviously, he was a big fan. He was in recording school and asked you for a referral to come to Sunset Sound, and now he's working here. I mean, it's such a special place here. It's got its quirks, it's got its leaks, but it's 62 years, 63 years.
It's a great community, and it is great to run into Greg in the hall or Nick in the hall, and you share secrets, you share your latest favorite piece of gear, you share a project you're working on, you share, I just worked with this new studio musician, he's incredible, you should try this guy next time you need a keyboard player or whatever. That's great, that sense of community, that scene. I mean, when I first started as an assistant engineer, there were probably 6, 8 assistant engineers at the studio, plus the brothers that owned the studio. They were all 3 great engineers and producers. And, you could just go to any of them and ask them like, hey, how do you mic up drums, or how do you do this? Or ask one of the other assistants like, hey, I just saw that you were working with Bill Schnee, and how did Bill mic up his drums? And, so there was this great sharing of information, and it's tough to make that happen now because we all live in our own little private studios and we only have our world that we know. And I love that about this place, and that there's really a lot going on, a lot of talent that comes through here. Kamasi Washington being in here for the last few months, I am like the hugest fan. I was like, leaning my head up against the Studio 2 door because I wanted to hear what they were doing because I'm such a fanboy,
Yes.
He's made incredible records over the last few years and really turned jazz upside down, and it's needed a kick. And, just an amazing artist, great band. And
Tony Austin, his engineer and drummer.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
He makes great records with him. Really, really great records.
It was 3 days ago. Because I'm doing another record and I have Tony engineering it. I'm EPing it, but Andre 3000 from Outkast, from actor. Did I tell you he was in here?
No, I didn't know that.
He was on Kamazi's session.
Wow.
And he had never been here, and he's like, "Is this the studio that Nirvana worked in?" I was like, "Nope, that was Sound City." But
yeah.
I said, "Andre, come with me." And for an hour, we walked around the studio. This is the Prince piano, and this is where Ted Templeman worked, and this is Joe's room here, and he was blown away. And I said,
Wow.
anytime you want to come in here and work Andre 3000,
Yeah.
let me know, and we will come to the room. Because one, he's just such a creative. He plays instruments. He's known from acting and rapping, but he is an artist.
Yep.
And everything a true artist does is just more impactful. Carmen Vandenberg, who I manage, who
We love.
I love her.
Carmen is gonna be a force. She, needless to say, is an incredible guitar player, but as a songwriter, she's just starting to come into her own and is writing really beautiful, heartfelt, intense, great sense of groove. And then she does her guitar thing with her own very unique sense of sonics.
Yeah.
This is going to be an impressive record.
And the authenticity of her too, because she is an artist. She writes poetry. She does all these other things, and it's just everything is just so creative and true. She doesn't write for anybody else either. It's just like, this is my experience. I need to get this out now.
Right. Exactly.
And I've never seen it more so in an artist where she's like, if she's not feeling it, she can't do it. Mm-hmm. It's just like,
and some artists are truly like that. To me, I almost like the challenge of having to plow through the uncertainty and indecisiveness and just get to a place where all of a sudden you sort of get an anchor. You see something that clicks and makes sense, and then it ties the whole song together for you, and you can just keep going down that path, and you got it. But sometimes you really do have to sort of stumble in the dark to get to a place. And I never mind making mistakes, or I like to have a plan, have a vision, have a direction, have a end point in mind, and blindly go there. And I'm okay if I get to the end of that road and then look back and go, not quite what I thought it was going to be here. I got to scrap this and start again. I'd rather do that than waffling all the way down the road, being not sure and trying this and trying that, and just I really love to be decisive and take something to its end. And if it's right, you know it. If it's not, then you just got to man up and go, okay, got to try it again, or got to scrap those 2 days of guitars that we did that, we thought had all this promise because they were taking the song in a new direction. It wants to be simpler than what we did.
That's like my friend Jacob Skiba, who produces Gary. He's like, Gary will do 85 takes on a solo and then use number 2, but you have to go there to know that this is exactly the way.
So you have to be convinced yourself. years ago, I did an album with Pat Benatar, who's an incredible singer, and sweetheart of a person, Neil Giraldo, her husband, great guitar player, just really amazing talent. But, she was trained as an opera singer. So, one of the few people that can get in a room and sing 6 hours, 8 hours, and the tone of her voice never changes, Most singers, their voice gets darker after they sing for a while. She could sing all day. But sometimes she would sing dozens of takes, and then, I'd go, can I play you something? There was something about the third take that you did. I held on to it. Can I play you this? And then it would be like, whoa, oh, that's pretty good. Wow. Can we take the bridge from what we just did on take 15 and then use all of take 3 because it's got a spark to it and put it together? But, sometimes you have to be convinced. You have to go through that process. Not always, but sometimes you've got to go all the way down the road and then look back and say, okay, now that I got it absolutely 100% perfect, is 100% perfect what's necessary for the tune?
Wow. Amazing. How do I become more cool? Like, you were fucking cool. I mean, you're New York cool. You're into jazz. You're a record producer. You know everybody. I mean, even when Carmen and I went to Soho House and you and Nick Launay, I mean, it's just fun being around you because you're just doing cool shit. And obviously, I've had a few times where I've been in the room when you're producing, and that's where you really find out who someone is, even an artist. It's kind of like the pressure. Is it going to get to someone? You have so much experience, but it's just, I'm such a fan of yours. So this was...
Man, Drew, thank you. That's kind.
I mean, I'm not... It's like, you're just a fucking awesome guy. Excuse my language. But, so that brings me to, talking about the community down here. And when I've sat in on these conversations and eavesdrop, when you're talking to Nick Launay about mixing Arcade Fire, it's the greatest story ever. You came up with this really cool concept, and I egged it on, which was, and it's going to be so good, and it's going to be on Sunset Sound's YouTube channel, but it's you and another producer sitting down in the control room behind me, and it's called How'd You Get That Sound with Joe Chiccarelli. Tell me about the format of this show.
Well, it really stemmed from that feeling of community, that feeling of running into other fellow record makers and being a fan of them and loving what they do and wanting to learn from them. I mean, I'm still ravenous. I watch the same YouTube videos that any kid getting started watches because I'm curious, is there another way? Is there something I missed? Is there a different way I can do it and get some different results? But specifically the podcast, the YouTube show came about with me thinking about running into friends in the hallway and sharing those secrets, if you will, those methods, and, really listening to the work that they'd produced and been really curious on the techniques that they use to get that result. And you could have a 15-minute conversation with somebody in the hallway and really learn a lot. And you would run in the control room and try the thing that they just suggested to try. They'd say, hey, did you ever try taking that piece of gear and instead of using it like this, turn the settings this way? And you go, no, I never did that. Oh, you should try that. So you'd run in the control room and try that. So it was kind of really spurred on by that sort of energy, and I'm excited about the show because really I get to be a fan of all these people and really share their secrets, and the nice thing is that we're mutual fans, so we basically are telling stories about records that we've made and what they appreciated in mine and what I appreciated in theirs, and I really hope people are going to dig it because I think it's a fun concept that all of us don't have that ability to bump into Greg or Nick or Eve or whomever in the hallway and share those secrets.
It's so good. I mean, this show is a big success, but this is designed about documenting the studio. Who was on the sessions? Who wrote the songs? Who was here? What did it smell like in '82 when Eddie walked in? You know, all these things. Prince.
Smelled the same in '82 as it smells now.
That is exactly true, and everybody that comes in says that it smells the same.
That's my favorite line. Is Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols came in here a number of times, and Steve said, "You know, I love this room. It even smells like the '70s."
Oh, wow. But, I mean, this stuff, this should be a subscription service because it's so good, but it's just free content. I don't want anything to compete with our show on our channel even, but this is so amazing when you're sitting down talking with Joe Morrissey. And it's like on the first installment, we have Nico Bolas, who's done 3 decades of Neil Young.
That's right.
Was on Toto 4, worked on that a lot, has worked with My Morning Jacket, has worked with everybody. Yep. Taylor Swift, done amazing, amazing work. The Mavericks he just did. Al Schmidt he was with for 2 decades. I mean, you know, that's one of the first guests. Greg Wells, who works with Adele, who works with 21 Pilots. Nick Launay, who did Arcade Fire, Mixed Neon Bible, and has done all the Nick Cave and all these great records I like.
What, you know, I just the other day happened to read an article, and I didn't even know that Nick produced Semisonic's Closing Time.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Dan Wilson's old band.
Talk about a
hit. I had no idea. Yeah. Huge hit. Huge hit. No, and Nick was somebody that I was following from when I first started. I would hear the stuff he was doing in Australia with you know, In Excess or Midnight Oil, and was just like, these records coming from Australia are incredible. Like, they have different gear down there. What's going on, you know? Yeah. And it was Nick. He was the different gear.
You can totally see a producer's personality when you know these people personally on a record. Can't you, when you agree?
Yes.
I mean, literally, there's the producer's vibe all over a record, which makes it amazing. I mean, you and him talking together is one of the most entertaining things ever. It's just like from David Byrne to Nick Cave to Jack White. It's like, I don't know. So, and then also we have... who else? Eve Rothman, who is another Sunset Sound producer.
My next door neighbor, who is doing the coolest stuff. I probably shouldn't say who he's working with now, but he is doing the new
Cherry Glazer.
Sorry, Eve is doing the new Cherry Glazer record, and it's so great to see Clem around the facility all the time. Just another day walking in with her guitar, going in to do some overdubs. It's like the coolest, you know.
Yes.
You want to be around that. You want to be around those people because they're you know, trying to reinvent the game, reinvent themselves, come up with something new. That's great energy to be around.
Yeah, he's such an up-and-coming underground producer. But, I mean, I'm the reason we got him in here. I was like, this guy's going to be gigantic one day.
Yeah, absolutely. He's
so
doing
creative.
really unique stuff. And I love the fact that 1 minute he'll do something that's super electronic and programmed. Then the next minute he'll do something that's a band.
Yep.
And, yeah. It's good. I always think it's really, really healthy to jump around in terms of the type of music you're working on, because I always fear getting stale. I always feel like if I were to do, I don't know, a heavy rock record and then another heavy rock record, and I'd start to copy myself and use the same techniques and all. But when you deliberately change up genres, you really are testing yourself, and you have to push yourself to do something different every time you get in the studio.
Your resume is no better example of that. Also, kids, go on Joe Chiccarelli All Music Discogs, and it's going to be about 197 pages for Joe's discography. But just look at the diversity from jazz to rock to reggae to soul to, I mean, Etta James. And then the next record you did after that was like, did you work with Robert Palmer on something?
No, I wish I did. It's a great voice.
Who is an artist that you've always wanted to work with and maybe will?
Well, certainly Bowie, you know, The Clash. Those were really, when I kind of really came up and started to understand music, you know, when I was younger, I sort of, I don't know, was a fan and was a player, but really didn't understand the making of music and the mindset behind it. I would say Bowie to me, because those records were always taking chances, and he would abandon a style. He'd do a record that, was a soul record, and then he'd go off and do something that was crazy atonal with Adrian Belew, and it was just fearless. To me, that's the one word I keep saying over the years so many times, is I think as an artist you really have to be fearless and just keep blindly going wherever it is that art takes you.
Yeah. Do you like St. Vincent?
I do. I think she's great. I think she's really great at concepts, really great at coming up with a sound and a character and a tone. I'm not sure she's hit the ultimate song yet, the one song that really like sticks in the public's mind.
Exactly.
But I think she's a great artist.
Yep. David Byrne kind of brought her up also. One more question about current artists. Sam Fender, know him?
I do. I think he's really, really great. In fact, it's funny that you mentioned it because it came up recently. Somebody asked if I was interested in working with him, and I said, yeah, I think there's something going on there. I think he's really cool.
That's exactly why I asked. I think you'd be perfect to work with him. Plus, he's just gigantic. I mean, we saw him over in Europe, and there was 150,000 people, and he wasn't even the headliner.
Exactly. No, it's interesting. Always interesting to me, artists that make it in other countries and don't quite work here, and how the opposite happens. Jack Savaretti, who's another artist that is huge in Europe, just starting to crack here. We were talking about this band, the Arkells, Canadian band, who basically own the airwaves in Canada, and anything they put out, huge up there, but doesn't quite cross the border. Stromae, Belgian artist that is just incredible, but it's just a cult following here. Yeah. But there, in France, can sell just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tickets.
Yeah. Even Kings of Leon, they were gigantic in London, England, all through there, and then nobody even knew who they were in the States for years.
Yeah.
That's wild. Okay, last topic, and there's so many people that are going to want to know about this. Morrissey, you've done more records with that artist than any other artist. This will be your fifth with him?
Sorry. This will be my fifth complete album with Morrissey. I did some B-sides prior to the very first album I did with him. He's a singular artist. He's a unique human being. He is an amazing lyricist and singer. He gets up to the microphone and kills it in 2 takes. Yeah. What he brings to a song, and I hear the demos before there's a melody there. And when I hear what he adds, what he brings to the song in terms of a melody and a lyric, it's incredible what he adds. He's just so special. And he walks the talk. I've never seen him, the things that he says and believes in and fights for, I've never seen him go back on his word. He's the kind of artist that I think, as a kid, you wanted those role models. You wanted people that spoke their mind, even if you didn't agree with them, but they stood for something. And he's just not afraid to state his mind, to be a provocateur at times, to really make you think, to kind of stir up some emotions in you and get you talking about things.
Exactly. I love that. Like, why are certain artists allowed to do that, but then other ones aren't?
Yeah.
And that's what I look for in an artist. What's your point of view?
Exactly. Exactly.
How do I relate? How do I believe in you? Maybe I don't believe with everything, but now it's like, if you're not set in stone, safety, they shit on you like that. Morrissey gets so much shit, and he's such a great artist. He's
such a great artist. It's really quite a privilege for me to have worked with him all these times, that he's really trusted me. And we've done different sounding records together, and he really, goes into this every record with a sort of vision. Last record, he really wanted to push it and do something that was a little bit bolder, more electronic. And this record, I have a feeling, will maybe be the opposite of that. It'll be a little bit more organic, a little more band-like, perhaps even simpler overall. But he's a strong personality, and you gotta put your trust in an artist. And if somebody is so sold on their vision, then you got to hop on board and believe in it and help them see that through, or you shouldn't be there.
Wow, so perfectly said. Okay, so amazing. I'm so not worthy of sitting here talking with you.
Stop it. Yes, you are. I heard the stuff you're doing, and more importantly, I heard the artists that you're finding and developing and nurturing, and that's a skill in itself. Finding artists in their very sort of embryonic states and really blowing them up and taking them to the point of actually doing a full album and being put out in the world. That's a lot of patience, a lot of time, a lot of belief, commitment.
It's a beautiful thing too. I mean, speaking of Carmen Vandenberg, it's like a year ago, she was a guitarist, and now she wouldn't sing in front of anybody, even you. I brought you right to her, and I said, "You got to."
It was always a battle to get those demos from her.
Now we're doing songs, and she gets right up. She sang in concert the other night, and she's got a great voice, but it's that imposter.
She's got a beautiful presentation. Like, there's just so much heart and soul in her voice. When she sings, you can really feel the story that she's telling. It's really impressive.
Exactly. You got it on your knees that one time, and she was like, "Oh my God, Joe got on his knees. He was so excited about it." I was like, "Yep, that's amazing." Last question. What do you want to see in your career before you are done making records? You've got the Grammys. You've worked with so many amazing artists. You are so respected by your peers. You've got your own studio. You've done so much. What is one more thing that you want to accomplish in your time?
I do this because
perfect record.
Yeah, it is ultimately the perfect record. I am still in search of that. It's kind of getting something that I feel like I can listen to. The artist is proud to listen to. They love it. There's no better feeling in the world when you've finished a record and an artist comes to you and says, "You know what? I love the record we just did. I love it. It's exactly what I had hoped to achieve." There's no better feeling than that.
Gosh.
It's pretty amazing, when you kind of, records can take months and months of your life to complete. And, there's times, like you say, that you have rough days for whatever reasons, and you have good days, and, you go through that journey together. And, at the end of the process, when the artist really believes and loves the record and is proud of it, man, there's no better feeling.
There's no better way to end than on that last sentence. Look for Joe's show, How'd You Get That Sound, on this channel, Sunset Sound Recorders. Joe's on Instagram under ArtFit Pro, Joe Chiccarelli. I'm going to go listen to some Joe records right now. You can start with about any genre. You're going to go make some more. Thank you so much, Joe.
Oh, man, it's a pleasure. This